Good morning, it is the 28th of September 2016. It's 5:30 in the morning and today is induction day at 37 weeks. We knew that this little one was going to be coming a little bit early, but we didn't actually find out until yesterday that they wanted to do it straight on 37 weeks. So Ben and I have really only had a few hours to adjust to it. I haven't had a wink of sleep. Ben has been snoring all night, so I think he's all right. But I've got up nice and early this morning to start getting myself ready. I wanted to just have an hour to myself, quiet, to just get some final bits done around the house, have a nice bath and wash my hair and put some really nice makeup on. Pretty sure that by this afternoon I'm going to be feeling not that great. So I just want to make myself feel as nice as possible now. I have to call in at 7:30 to get a bed, or to confirm my bed, and then it's go time. Nervous. Molly, where are we going?
At our house.
Yeah, you're going to stay at Granny's house. And where's Mummy going? Mummy going to get baby out? Yeah. So it's 10:15 and I'm hooked up onto the monitor to see how Bubs is doing, and then once that's been done then we'll get the induction process started. So we've got a nice little room here, got a nice ball there being used as a footstool. Here we go. It's 1:30 and I've had my medication to get everything going. So now we're just walking through the golf course and trying to get everything going, but nothing as of yet. It's been a month now and Felix is home and back with us and doing really well. Initially I'd hoped to do a whole birth vlog and kind of document that to show you all and document his first couple of days with us, but given the events that came about throughout the labour and the birth, we didn't film any of that. So really in this video what I want to do is just fill in the gaps of the labour and explain a bit about Felix's entrance into this world, his recovery, and then I'll bring him in and you can have a look at him, although he is in the background making noise if you can hear him doing that. So the last piece of footage that you saw was us having a walk after the first dose of medication. Nothing really happened with that medication, so at around 5 o'clock in the evening they decided to give me a second dose. That worked pretty quickly and the contractions started, but everything was quite slow, no real progress. I was coping really well with the contractions, didn't need any pain relief. As it got to the evening, so I think it was around 10-11 o'clock, the contractions did pick up in speed and they kind of intensified, but again the midwife told me that nothing was really happening, so they suggested that Ben went home. Ben went home and then all of a sudden the contractions got very, very quick. The midwife checked me and said again that I wasn't really making any progress. So at this point I thought I must have been really overreacting and just wasn't coping very well with the pain. But about an hour later, I had to go to the midwife again and say that I really wasn't coping. The contractions were coming very quickly. She checked me again at that point and said that I was 4 centimetres dilated, which meant that I could go over to the delivery suite and I could have my epidural, which at that point I was begging for. To me, it felt like everything was moving very quickly, but obviously when the midwives and medical staff are telling you that nothing is really going very quickly, you just believe them. The midwife was sitting with me at this point after she called delivery suite. She told me there was no room in delivery suite, so that I'd have to wait a little bit longer. And literally within those couple of minutes, I really knew that I was going to have this baby, and the midwife didn't even check me. She also knew. So I heard her calling delivery suite and telling them that they had to get me a room. There was still no room, so there was a bit of a panic about whether I was going to deliver on the ward, which was an induction ward. So there were lots of other women on this ward, and all of them, poor ladies, were probably having a right panic as I was telling the midwife that I was going to have the baby there and then. So they whisked me into a wheelchair, ran me down the corridor, and managed to find a low-risk birthing suite. Now, the low-risk birthing suite was somewhere that I shouldn't have been, just because Felix was a high-risk labour, so I did need all the monitors, but there really wasn't any choice at that point. And as soon as we got into the room, it was a few pushes and he had arrived. So from the midwife telling me that I was 4 centimetres and needing to go to delivery to the point where Felix was born was just 11 minutes, which meant, unfortunately, that Ben missed the birth. At the time, it was really scary to be doing it on my own and only have the midwives there. But when Felix was born, that kind of panic of not having Ben there quickly disappeared because it was very apparent that he wasn't very well. They handed him to me and he was grey and floppy, so they took him straight out of the room. Now at that point they told me that he was just very shocked, which made sense to me because I was in shock and it had been incredibly quick labour of only kind of 11 minutes in active labour. At that point, Ben arrived, and the first thing Ben saw was Felix being resuscitated. Ben then came into me and sat with me for a few minutes. And at that point, the midwives had got him breathing again, or the doctors had got him breathing again. He was quite pink, and so they brought him in to see whether he could stay with us. But within a few minutes of being with us, he had gone grey and really wasn't responsive again. So after a bit of umming and ahhing and the doctors checking him, they decided to rush him straight to the intensive care unit. Again, at this point, they had said that they really thought that he was just in shock and that they just wanted to check him over, get him stabilised, and that we'd be able to go and see him soon. So Ben and I got taken to the postnatal ward, which is a ward where you get taken with your baby, usually, once you've just had it, and Felix was taken over to neonatal. I think it was probably only about an hour later that the midwife came and got us and said that we could go over to the neonatal intensive care. So we went over there, and pretty much as soon as we arrived, it was very apparent that he wasn't very well at all. They were x-raying him when we arrived. And the reason that they x-rayed him was they wanted to see his lungs. They had noticed that he had respiratory distress, which is basically where he couldn't breathe on his own. And the x-ray showed that his lungs hadn't developed past around 32 weeks, so they were very immature. I was 37 weeks at that point, which is kind of at the point where the lungs should be mature. So being induced at that point should have been very safe. So then they decided that they would intubate him with a ventilator, so a ventilator in the mouth, and they needed to give him a medication called surfactant. I don't know if I've said that right. Basically, that's what you would have if you have a steroid injection in pregnancy, so it matures the lungs. So instead of having an injection, they put it directly down the ventilator and into his lungs. And at that point, the doctor explained that what they thought had happened was that because I had gestational diabetes, my body hadn't created or hadn't produced any or enough of the surfactant to mature his lungs, and that coupled with the fact that we had an incredibly quick birth with him also affected his lungs. That's because during labour, the fluid drains out of the lungs. Usually labour is quite a long process. With him, he'd come incredibly quickly, and so his lungs were all kind of wet and sticky, and it was pretty much like blowing up a balloon is what they were explaining to us. So it's kind of like that first breath of trying to blow up a balloon, where it's incredibly difficult, and then usually after that, as you keep blowing a balloon up, it gets easier and easier. But for him, his lungs were just inflating and collapsing and inflating and collapsing, which was making it really difficult for him to breathe. So he was in an incubator. He was completely sedated. They sedated him with morphine so that he couldn't feel any pain, and that's where our journey with him really began. It was 9 days, I think, that we had with him in there, and he did progress really well. The first couple of days were quite difficult, so they kept trying to lower his oxygen levels on the ventilator, and that wasn't really working, so it was just a really slow process. And during that process, we weren't able to pick him up. We were only able to touch him a tiny bit. They explained that for babies that are really unwell, touching them can be painful and uncomfortable, and seeing as they had to handle him so much for medical procedures, they didn't think that we should be touching him. But on the 1st of October, Felix was allowed to come out of his incubator for his first cuddle. At that point, the mouth ventilator had been taken off, and he was on a different kind of ventilator, which you'll see in the pictures kind of covers his nose. It was really scary for Ben and I getting him out of the incubator for the first time. You have to have nurses helping you. There are lots of wires, lots of tubes, lots of beeping. But at the same time, it was really amazing to sit and have a cuddle with him. They closed the whole of the intensive care room, so there weren't any other visitors. It was really nice and dark, and it was just us. And after that first cuddle, he really started to pick up. So he went from the CPAP ventilator on his nose to an Optiflow oxygen supply, which is through 2 little prongs through the nose and kind of squirts oxygen up. From there, he then got moved out of intensive care and into the high dependency unit. He was still in his incubator at that point and still on his Optiflow, but that just meant that he was doing a bit better and didn't need the one-on-one care. Whilst he was in high dependency, they noticed that his jaundice levels were quite bad, and he was getting yellower and yellower. So they decided that they would give him some light therapies. That's just where they put them under kind of a little ultraviolet light, put an eye mask over them, and he was on that for about 12 hours. And that worked really well. And helped his jaundice. He's still actually a little bit jaundiced now, but it has improved a lot. And then from there he got moved into a cot, and from then he had his oxygen taken off. He also had a feeding tube, which I haven't mentioned, so a feeding tube that went directly into his stomach, and he had that from being straight from when he was in intensive care. The first couple of days they didn't actually feed him, they just gave him a glucose drip, and then they started feeding him my milk through a tube. So after that, we kept the tube in, but we decided to start trying the bottle, or they suggested that we start trying the bottle, and he took to that really well. So after a day or so of being on the bottle, they removed the feeding tube, and then the last process was just to establish his feeding before he could go home. So he moved into a feeding nursery where myself, Ben, and the midwife, or the nurses there, continued to feed him and wanted to see some weight gain from him. And then the very last step of Felix's recovery was us moving into transitional care and rooming in, as they call it, which is where we actually came back into the hospital to stay with him and take care of him ourselves, but whilst they did all the checks on him every hour. I also didn't mention that I was only able to stay in the hospital for 5 days, so I was with him for 5 of the days, not with him one-to-one. I was on a ward and he was in neonatal, but I was able to go there constantly 24 hours a day, so I was there a lot. And then on day 5, unfortunately, I had to come home, which was incredibly hard, but it was also nice at the same time to kind of be in my own home and just get a little bit of rest. And then I was just going in the daytime, and then they admitted me back in for the last night in transitional care, where we just practiced with him, and then the next day they announced that he could come home. So that's been a very nice process having him home, but also quite a scary process because he still was quite a poorly baby at that point. He was incredibly small. He was only £5.9 when he came home. When he was born, he was £6.8, so he had dropped a lot of weight. But he's doing really well now, so I'm going to bring him on and then I can explain a bit about his progress now. So this is baby Felix without any tubes, wires, heart rate monitors. He's doing incredibly well. He was a month old a couple of days ago, and so he's been home with us for a couple of weeks now. Last time we got him weighed, he weighed £7.1, so he had put on a huge amount of weight. But it is also really strange at the same time that he is the size of a brand new baby and he's a month old. Marley was £7.10 when he was born, so he was bigger than this when he was born, which seems really strange to me that I was carrying a baby bigger than this in my tummy with him. Most of his issues have resolved, so his respiratory distress seems to be completely sorted now. He breathes really well on his own, doesn't have any issues with that. He does have really bad reflux, which is quite common with babies who have been in the neonatal unit, and especially babies who have respiratory distress. So that's been really tiring because it means that after a feed he can't be put straight down. He's quite fussy, but we have just started some baby Gaviscon for that, so we're going to see how that goes and hopefully that improves for him. Aside from that, he doesn't have any real issues, although his immune system is very low just because of the antibiotics and the amount of medication they had to give him. That will have really affected his immune system, so it is a case of just trying to keep him well. But having that we have a 2-year-old in the house, it's quite difficult. We just have to try and keep our eye on him, and we know the warning signs for him. We know what to do if he becomes unwell again. But overall, he's doing really well. For us, it's been a long month, a long process. We're still trying to process everything that happened. We knew that he wasn't very well in my tummy before he was born, but we didn't expect anything like this to happen. I don't think anyone expects that, and no one expects to see their baby covered in tubes and ventilators. So it's been really emotional for us, and I think we coped very well in hospital, but it's actually been since we got home that it's really hit us. At the same time, we're not having any sleep, and on top of that, we've got a 2-year-old as well. So we're just adjusting, and Marley's adjusting as well. He's only just started to realise that Felix is a permanent fixture, so he's not a huge fan of me taking time out to feed him and things like that. But he is also really affectionate and really sweet with him. And Ben and I are just really excited about Felix getting a bit bigger. I think with Marley, I wanted to cherish every moment of him being a newborn, and with Felix, I just want him to get bigger. I want him to be smiling, making noises, just a bit sturdier really, so that we don't have to worry so much. And also it'll be so lovely to see Marley with him. So I hope that answers some of the questions that people have been asking me about my labour, my birth, what was wrong with Felix. If you like this video, please do press like and subscribe to this channel. I'm hoping to make lots more updates on Felix and Marley, and generally just videos about being a mum. And I will see you all soon.